I've reached the pinnacle of achievement on what you taught us to do, an open relationship.
Hi, everybody. I'm Todd Dankin. Welcome back to Becoming the King of Pot. With me, as always, is the King of Pot, my infamous cousin, Bruce Perlowin. Bruce, how's it going?
It's going great. I look really forward to talking today about more or less the personal relationships that a King of Pot has during his heyday of marijuana smuggling.
Yeah, that's what I want to get into today. But before we do, if you are watching us, please, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe and like. It really helps our cause here at Becoming the King of Pot. So, Bruce, this is, we're in the late 70s. You got lots of boats on the water, lots of money coming in. Everything's happening. You got a house up in Ukiah. You got this beautiful house in Berkeley. You're really living this kingpin lifestyle. So let's talk about that for a second. You know, the first time you really get to experience true wealth.
Well, it really wasn't the first time. The first time I experienced what I considered at, the age of 24 is true wealth was in Florida. And I've mentioned in the podcast, you make $100,000 a week, right? And all of a sudden there's girls everywhere. They pop out of the woodwork like flies on rice. And then I would tend to spend all my money buying boats, buying trucks or vans, tools of the trade. So next time a load comes in, I have my boats, I have my trucks, I have my warehouses. And the money would be gone, but the women were still there. And so I realized it was not the money that made you change your behavior and attracted all the women, which is the big thing when you're 24. All right, that's one of the main things you want is women and girlfriends and lovers. And so it was the security and the self-confidence you exuded when you had or did not have the money. So just like, okay, I spent everything, but next week I'll make another 10,000 or 100,000. So that was my first experience, and it just carried on. The money and the wealth gave me the ability to buy the tools of the trade because there was nothing more you could do in those years than to smuggle marijuana. I don't care if you owned hotels, which I did, owned banks, which I almost bought, owned houseboat building companies. Nothing could come close to make how much money you could make on marijuana. So all that stuff was just a front, and when I spent my money on the wealth.
Yeah. Well, that's reinvesting in your business which of course makes a lot of sense. But let's take a step away from that for a second, and let's talk about your relationships with your wife at the time, your girlfriends at the time, your kids at the time. How did they all react to you being the King of Pot at this point?
Okay, well, let's back it up to Florida and start off with. When I graduated high school, I went to Day Junior College for 1 year, all right? And one of my teachers was Alberta Goodman. She was an English teacher, but she was like the ultimate hippie in the forefront of, the interpersonal transformational movement. And so she taught us that marriage was a construct of possession. You married a woman so you can take your possessions and pass it on to your heirs. And that's all it was. It wasn't a love or it was, we have a distorted view according to her. And she had two husbands. And then later on, she had one husband and two girlfriends. And, she was a counselor and with couples. And so her big thing was open marriage. Have an open marriage. So when I met Becky, I met her when she was working in the store in Gainesville. Michelle was my girlfriend at the time, and she introduced me to Becky. And Becky had a lot of business sense, so she was running the store. A little bit later, we became a boyfriend and girlfriend, but she still had another boyfriend. So we were lovers, but she had her lover. It was an open relationship. Fast forward to the wisdom I have today.
What was that like? What was that like in the, mid 70s, late 70s, where everyone's not really committed, but kind of committed? And, what are these open relationships like?
Fun. A lot of fun. It was a little bit better than just being best friends. You're best friends and lovers. They call it friends with benefits. And it was quite common. So when I moved out to California, got in the Ukiah house, Becky shortly after that moved out too. And we were pretty monogamous for the first, I don't know, year. Of course, she got pregnant pretty quickly, and I delivered Reese, or Jeremy Reese, Lynn is his name, at home, which we went over that in a previous episode.
Yeah.
And he, when he was born, he jumped out of the womb and said, "What's up, doc?" Because she didn't do any drugs. He was clear-headed. He believed that until he was 12 years old. Anyways, so I was allowed to have other girlfriends. So I had a crush on Lois, and I had a crush on Roseanne. Now, Roseanne's husband, who they were now divorced, I had sold weight to, not big weight. I gave him like 50, 100 pounds. And then after they got divorced, I was still working with her. So we became boyfriend and girlfriend, and she lived in San Rafael. So when I would go from Ukiah down to San Rafael, I would stay with Roseanne. And then Lois, she was a lady that I met in Florida, and she lived on I had 350 acres of land in Arkansas, and I had a big house and a smaller house. She lived in the smaller house. So I had a house for Becky, I had a house for Lois, and then Roseanne said, "I want a house,"
Of course.
And Roseanne was probably a very more colorful and less down to earth than all the others, a bit more wild. She was a dealer. She dealt marijuana here off and on, and just a wild kid. Grew up in Florida in the wild days. So Becky, at the other hand, she teamed up with the pilot, Alex. I bought her an airplane for her birthday. We got her a pilot, and her boyfriend was Alex. So that was the relationship. It was
Okay, well, let's back up for a second. So let's talk about, I bought Becky an airplane for her birthday, and oh, by the way, her pilot was Alex. So let's talk about this ability to be able to go out and buy your wife or your girlfriend or your lover an airplane. Right.
That was actually pretty cool. She wanted to learn to fly, so she was taking lessons at the Ukiah airport, and Alex was the teacher, the flight instructor.
Yeah.
And so he would fly, and what we did, we secretly bought her a plane, a Cessna P210 with tip tanks, long-range tip tanks, all, avionicked out. That's the radios in an airplane, but also avionicked out or radioed out for me to be able to communicate with my boats, my walkie-talkies, single sideband, ham radio, everything, and a bunch of antennas sticking out the bottom of the fuselage. So
it's really a work plane that you let Becky use. It sounds like.
No, it was really a Becky's plane that she let me use once in a while.
Oh, okay.
For work.
Okay.
Anyways,
All right, but talk about that for a second. Look, you're a kingpin living in Ukiah in this gorgeous, mansion that is on 300 acres, right? And you're buying planes. I want to know what's happening. Is that just normal? Do you expect it? Or are you really like, wow, this is the most amazing thing ever because I can go buy a plane?
It was the most amazing thing ever because I could go by a plane. And it was her birthday. We parked it at the airport. We put a big red ribbon around the plane with the big red bow tie on the top. And we drove down there, and Becky's looking. She goes, "Look at that plane. It has a ribbon. Why is there a ribbon?" And then it dawned on her. So she was hysterically happy. So now she had her own plane. And it was funny because open relationships, just for the record, do not work. They don't ever work because jealousy is a part of human behavior. So even though it was okay and I had two girlfriends, I would get jealous anytime she was with Alex. So, and she probably got jealous or mad at Lois because Lois lived downstairs in the Ukiah house and we had our bedroom upstairs. And then Roseanne was in San Rafael, and I bought Alex and Becky a house in Fort Bragg. A beautiful, beautiful house overlooking the ocean. And that was their getaway, So interesting story.
That was nice of you to buy your wife's lover and her a place to go have sex.
Yeah, well, I don't want them making love in my bedroom. That's me and Becky. And me and Lois only made love on the downstairs. me and Roseanne in San Rafael. So,
you got to have rules and set boundaries. I like that.
Yes. Yeah. But an interesting thing happened. On one of my trips back to Florida, I went and tracked down Alberta, And I said, Alberta, I am rocking. I've reached the pinnacle of achievement on what you taught us to do, an open relationship. I have Becky, I have Roseanne, I have Lois, and Lois is with Alex, and Roseanne has whoever she was with. I'm not sure. And so she looked at me and she goes, Bruce, I've had every relationship known to man. Bisexual, trisexual, 2 husbands, 2 wives. I've counseled over 2,000 couples. Open relationships don't work. There she is.
So she changed her whole philosophy, huh?
Yeah, after her experience. And she completely burst my bubble. All right. So I had no choice but to make love with her and then go back to California.
Duh.
And that was another childhood fantasy, to make love with your English teacher.
Sure. Well, it depends on what your English teacher looked like, I guess.
Gorgeous. Alberta was gorgeous.
Right.
And highly intelligent. So the open relationship. Now, fueling the flames of those relationships was the Quaalude powder. All right?
Uh-oh.
So this is all personal.
Quaalude powder.
Yes.
So talk about the Quaalude powder.
Okay. When I was in Florida, some guy owed me like $10,000 or maybe $30,000. And he paid me with the Quaalude machine. All right. So here's a Quaalude machine. It's a machine that makes Quaaludes. You could barely, 2 guys could barely move it because it was huge. It was you had a hopper that you put the material in, and then you had a 714 die, and a line on the bottom. The top die says 714. The bottom die had the line exactly like real Aurora 714s. And it would go and spit out the finished Quaalude powder. Now, you had Quaalude powder. You had a buffer, a binder, a lubricant. Those were the powders. They're all powders. And you mix them a certain percent. All right, 10% this, 5% that, 80% Quaalude powder. And the Quaalude powder itself was methaquaaludes. All right, so that was the thing that got you hot. I could never sell those. I could not put that much poison onto the marketplace. I figured, I'm not going to do this. It's just like cocaine. We're not going to do it. People crash and kill themselves when they take too many Quaaludes. So I said, throw it all away. We threw away except the powder. We threw away all the chemicals, the buffer, the binder, the lubricant. We kept the Quaalude powder itself. We took the 714 dyes, threw those over the Golden Gate Bridge into the ocean so nobody else could make Quaaludes and poison Americans. And I got rid of the machine, but we kept the Quaalude powder.
Right.
So after a while, we just took the powder with a teaspoon and put it in our mouth and drank something. So that was my drug of choice, was the Quaalude powder. And that's, I'm listening to all the other podcasts. So smokers say, alcohol, cocaine, they all had vices, I guess that was my vice. So it was a big vice.
So no, talk about that. So for a second. So how much Quaalude powder would you do in a day, in a week, in a month?
I wasn't addicted to it because I was working all the time. But on weekends, probably I just get high. I would say I use Quaaludes once a week, maybe twice a week at the most.
Yeah.
Not a daily routine. Also, I've recontacted Roseanne, and she's telling me stories about back then, and we'll have her on. And she said, Bruce, you send me flowers every Wednesday. Uh-oh. I sent flowers to Becky every Tuesday, even though I wasn't there. She said she got flowers. She knew the flower lady by first name. So did so did Roseanne down in San Rafael. So she got flowers. And then she also said something funny in her text recently. She goes, I said that if I'm going to be with you, I need a psychiatrist. Because, I guess you're jacked up to the max, and you're a Z personality or an A personality and an adrenaline junkie. And you're always, always working. 2 things I remember about her. One thing. So I paid for her psychiatrist. She took me one time to Fort Bragg, to an apartment or a hotel overlooking the ocean, and there's hot tubs in there. And there's no phone reception. And she goes, and back then it was all pay phones or, landlines, no cell phones. So I said, she says, you're not going to make any phone calls this whole weekend. All right. Because she had lived with a drug dealer, Paul, her ex-husband. And she knew the type. We're always working, always on the phone. And there was no phones, no phone calls. And I remember saying, let me go to the lobby and just make one phone call because there's a payphone in the lobby. So she said, okay. This is after about a day and a half. I remember walking to the payphone, and it was like I was a heroin addict. I was jonesing. And when I got to that payphone and put the card, I went, finally. So, and I made a bunch of phone calls and went back to the room. After the weekend was over, she says, okay, how was that? She goes, did any boat sink? Did anybody get busted to go to jail? Did you lose any money? And the answer was no. Everything, the machine continued to operate without me being a micromanager and watching every piece of it and constantly expanding it. So
sure. Well, that must give you a sense of freedom, that you're not locked in, that you don't have to be there every 5 seconds.
It did, but it didn't sink in. I went right back to work, being a maniac, working all the time, 22 hours a day. Then an interesting thing happened. This is all in my personal life. I had done yoga my entire life, on and off. And a guy named Al came. Now we started making the transition from Colombian to doing a bunch of Thai loads. Traditional history of marijuana is right here, starting with Mexican, then Jamaican, then Colombian, then Thai weed. And then Mexicans came back around with homegrown, then the homegrown industry, and now the legal industry. So we're covering it all here. Now we're going to the advent of massive amounts of Thai weed from me and from other smugglers coming into the United States as a dominant, not the dominant, because you can only do one trip a year, two if you're lucky. And so Al said, Bruce, you're out of control. I mean, and I was, I was going to meetings with lawyers and leaning back in my seat and falling over, I mean.
Well, define out of control. What was out of control?
Too many Quaaludes. When you do drugs, it's not so much that you're drunk or jacked out of your mind, although you can get jacked out of your mind on Coke. You're making bad decisions. The decisions aren't well thought out. And when you have money to operate on your decisions, that's even worse.
Sure.
Because now you implement those crazy ideas. So he says, you're out of control.
And it becomes expensive, right? It just becomes expensive and a waste of money.
Yeah. He says, you're out of control. You need to start doing Kundalini yoga. Because he had a yoga teacher or a mentor or a guru. He wasn't a guru, but he was a mentor named Yogi Bhajan. And he was teaching Kundalini yoga. So let's explore my history with yoga and meditation. Started at age 7 when I had a book, and I remember reading the book. I said, Dad, what does, and I couldn't even say the word, meditation mean? I spelled it out, sounded it out. And he goes, oh, here's what you do. You sit like this, and he put me in the full lotus. At age 7, it was easy to go into the full lotus. In fact, to this day, at age 74, I can still sit in a full lotus. And,
well, that's impressive.
Yeah, and
we're gonna have to see that one of these days. We want to see you in a full lotus.
So anyways, and he says, so you sit like this and you think of pretty thoughts. So I would sit in the full lotus and think of fields of flowers, and that was my pretty thoughts. All right, so that went on. He would joke around. He'd lift me up in the full lotus, carry me over, put me down on the couch, and it was like a funny thing to do. Or I could do a headstand and be in the full lotus. And then in the 60s, when yoga became more popular, I was taking yoga classes in the Yogi Rama and his wife Sita, but he was the teacher. I went to yoga ashram. He, in fact, married Diane and I at the yoga ashram. Before that, I had found a real thick book on yoga, hatha yoga, and it showed you all these different postures. Well, I was a gymnast and a weightlifting champion. I was a high-performance athlete. So I would do all those postures I saw in the book. I go, oh, I can do that one. Oh, I could do that. Oh, that one's a hard one, but I eventually could do them all. And so I did that all throughout high school. We also went to the Theosophical Society. We adapted a spiritual lifestyle, and yoga was a big part of that spiritual lifestyle.
And what did you get from yoga? What was it giving you, and to make you keep wanting to do it all the time?
Calm, relaxing, and physically challenging. It was great exercise. It calmed you down. I was always, I guess, hyperactive, maybe you could say. I mean, I would lift weights just to relax every day for an hour after school. So that was my relaxation. What else happened with yoga? So we did a lot of yoga. Then in 1970, when I was hitchhiking around America, and I went to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Interesting, because Ann Arbor was the hotbed of marijuana distribution in the early 70s. I didn't know that. I just was, we're in New York. Oh, where we go? We're going to Ann Arbor. Okay, I'll take a ride to Ann Arbor. And then in Ann Arbor, I heard that there's a bunch of yogis gathering in the desert, and I ended up going to the first summer solstice celebration put on by Yogi Bhajan and the Sikhs in the Kundalini Yoga organization.
So and what is that? What is that?
Kundalini Yoga is you may have seen them. The Sikhs are the guys with turbans, white turbans. They wear all white. They don't shave, so they have a long beard. And they no drugs, vegetarian lifestyle, vegetarian eaters, and doing Kundalini Yoga 2.5 hours every day between 4 and 6:30. So they call that sadhana. And it's pretty intense. And it was rapid breathing, like the breath of fire. Like 120 breaths in per minute. And that was a great exercise, opened up, your consciousness. So I love all these Sikhs, and, hippies in the desert.
What's that like? And how many people are there? And what kind of crowd is there sitting doing this heavy breathing?
There was about 200 people there, at least 100 and probably closer to 200. And it was really cool because there's a giant bonfire that they would make remember, we're in New Mexico on a dry lake bed, and it was freezing.
So the original
cold
Burning Man is what you're saying.
Yeah, a giant fire. And I would sleep as close to the fire as I could get just to keep warm. And then they would dance around the fire. They'd all hold hands and make a giant circle and sing, "May the long time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on." It was a very calming, spiritual, wonderful experience. And so I left that and continued my journey. And now, years later, Al's telling me, "You need to start doing Kundalini Yoga with Yogi Bhajan." And what it was on a weekend, he said, if you go to a white yoga tantra class, it's worth 10 years of meditation. And what it was is men and women would line up in a row, and Yogi Bhajan would be at the head of the room, and you would do these poses. You'd hold a pose like for half hour, 45 minutes, or you do breaths of fire. You'd go through a whole routine, and the energy would go from woman to man to woman, down the rows. So the rows had to be perfectly straight, and it would zigzag, and then it would pass through Yogi Bhajan. I mean, this is what they told us, and he would clean out your karma. And a weekend of white tantric yoga is worth 10 years of meditation. I said, "Al, I'm in." Okay. And so, and meanwhile,
so clearly your karma needed cleaning, right?
Yeah, and I was a mess.
Right.
You don't live that kind of lifestyle. Me or any of the other kingpins of yesteryear, they all.
And when you say you were a
mess,
what do you mean you were a mess? You were just not sleeping. You were overworked. You were always worried. Tell me what's happening in your brain that says that you were a mess.
I wasn't never worried, but your personal relationship was a mess. Who the hell has 3 girlfriends? And one is bad enough. It's the epitome
Hard
of
enough, that's
insanity.
for sure.
Yeah. You've been married for a really long time, and the epitome of insanity is having more than one girlfriend.
Yeah.
So, and I never cheated. That wasn't part of my world. But I was allowed to have other girlfriends. That was just crazy. And So
is the mess, the managing of those relationships with the women, is the mess, the stress of that combined with the business, combined with, the fatherhood, combined with all of the things? I just want to understand what's making you a mess. What your mess was really like inside, and what you were battling with.
Well, it wasn't really a big battle. The woman and the girlfriends were unfortunately, second nature. They were just there. All right. The big thing was the smuggling organization. And you're constantly, stressed out because the boat's sinking. This load isn't happening. The Colombians need their money. This guy hasn't gotten paid. The pot's not as good as you wanted it to be. So that stressful, where are you going to loan the money? You got to do something. Are the police looking for you? Again,
all of that now makes sense. Now it all makes sense why you were a mess. I mean, how do you deal with that without the yoga?
It's very, very hard. Yoga saves you. It really does.
Well, yoga and Quaaludes, right?
Yeah. Now, the Quaaludes went away when the yoga came in. Okay.
Got it.
So, some people start drinking, some people start snorting coke. They're all stress reduction methodologies.
Yeah.
Right. So I luckily chose a healthier one. So I'm going to all these yoga tantra classes. 10 years of meditation. This is great. I'm going to become enlightened. So, I went to Anchorage, Alaska. I went to Amsterdam in Europe. I went to Mexico City. Wherever he was doing one, I went there. In fact, I was on my way to my 16th yoga class when I got busted in Chicago. So, which is good. I had 15 white yoga tantra classes under my belt. I had 150
years.
Right.
Right.
And I'll jump to one funny story I may have told you. I'm in county jail. All right. And in county jail in Tampa, Florida, it's, you're all the blacks. There's maybe one other white guy there. And that can be a tough situation, because, they try and bully you or try and boss you around or something and steal your food and get, blackmail you for commissary money. And I would sit on the top of the bunk with my legs crossed, with my long beard and my long hair. I think I was dressed. No, I wasn't dressed in white. They had, regular county jail garb. And I'm saying, with your eyes 9/10 closed, staring at the tip of your nose, and on the exhale, you go, Waheguru, 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 8 times on the exhale. All right? And the black guys would say, we don't know who he is. We don't know what he is, but don't mess with that guy because he'll voodoo you. So they didn't touch me. So that served me, but also...
So thank you for the really good advice for little white guys if you go to jail, right? Just start Kundalini yoga, right?
Yeah, and I always felt that, because I don't think much things happen or everything happens for a reason. I always thought that was my preparation to spend 9 years in prison because it was an incredibly productive time, as we'll learn in later episodes when we get to that part of the story.
Isn't there a story that, during your yoga journey, you really wanted to go away for 9 or 10 years and that was always part of the plan, at the end of, as you were closing down the organization?
Well, it was part of the plan since high school. I told all my friends, one day I'm going to disappear for 10 years. And I always had in my mind a Himalaya cave, right, in the Himalayas to meditate and practice my sadhana. And it turned out that I did almost that whole 10 years in the modern day Himalaya cave.
In an 8x8 cell, right?
Yeah. I taught Kundalini yoga in prison to the other inmates. It was very helpful. I remember one lady I dated, she had diverticulitis. And she had it for, 5-6 years. I cured her in 3 days using Kundalini yoga, diet, and exercise. 3 days later, it was gone, which is easy to do.
I had diverticulitis for years and years. I wish you would have helped me out there, bro.
Or you could have taken the Quaalude powder when you were up in Ukiah.
That's true. That's true. Had I known there was Quaalude powder in Ukiah, it would have been a whole different trip.
Yeah. We kept that quiet. We didn't want to corrupt you that much.
Yeah, I guess not. I know you kept the small. I wasn't allowed to go to a dock and help unload, and now you kept the Quaalude powder away from me. What else did you keep from me?
We'll think of more things as we go along. But to this day, I do Kundalini yoga. If you're depressed, now I'm not depressed, or I'm not. I have suicidal thoughts, but if you have any of those, Kundalini yoga is a amazing, incredible technology that will help you in a lot of things. They have kriyas. They call them kriyas. It's a set of yoga. It's this pose and that pose, breath of fire. Then you go from one step to another. When you're chanting, there's something like, the number 64 acupressure points and the roof of your mouth and your tongue. So that rhythmic stimulation, and this is like science now. They've taken tests and wired people's brains up.
Sure.
You go into global alpha, and it changes your problems. It helps you. I mean, I know people that had suicidal tendencies for years and years, and they say Kundalini yoga saved me, and that's not like that's not the exception. That's the rule. So anyone out there, and it's very active. You can do a very active Kriya set that's very hard, or you can do a easier one. But there's like hundreds and hundreds of Kriyas or yoga sets for all kinds of things, and I'm a big proponent of that. Other smugglers, the same thing. Billy Hayes from the movie Midnight Express, he did yoga every single day when he was in the prison in Turkey, and he goes, that saved his sanity. Randy Lanier, he's done yoga every single day. He got I don't know how many years he served, 29 years. That's insane. But yoga kept him sane. And they both, including me, do that today. So we're all proponents of doing yoga. And now, of course, there's a yoga studio in every single town in America. But back then, it wasn't as prevalent as it is now.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were ahead of your time even back in the yoga days, huh? Knowing that it was good for mind, body, and soul.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I read Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I read Deep The Third Eye by Lope Singh Rampa. Yogi Ramacharaka had a whole series of books, Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga. I read all those. And this is in high school and right after high school.
And how do you think all of that shaped you into being this, pretty incredible businessman when it came to smuggling?
Well, it kept me centered. It kept me from freaking out. Like they used to say, they used to call me Alfred E. Newman, what me worry, because I never worried. There was no such thing as a problem. There's only solutions. So I'd instantly focus on solutions. And we would do a meditation. I don't know if it really worked, but we tried it to pull the fog in. When the boats would come under the Golden Gate Bridge, if there's a foggy day, you're invisible. Not just radar after you go underneath the San Rafael Bridge and the radar blind, but nobody can see you. So we would do a meditation. I don't know if it worked or not, but the fog did come in about 60% of the time that our boats were coming in.
So the story goes is that you brought the fog in with meditation, right?
Right.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Certainly makes a better story.
Well, you ask Craig, he'll swear by it.
Yeah, I bet. And did the yoga help you? I know you have 2 young kids at this point, right? One's living in Florida, going back and forth. The other one, living in Ukiah. How does yoga help your relationship with your kids?
Well, we did what I would do with Aubrey, more Aubrey growing up, is we would hold hands like this, and I would circulate the energy through my body through him, and that's called prana, universal energy. And he could tell you, oh, it's coming in this one, it's going out that one, and then you could reverse it. All right. And other people could feel that same energy. I call it Reiki now. All right.
Yeah.
But back then I could, through my hand, these are called siddhis, spiritual powers. The problem with siddhis and spiritual powers, you cannot use them for bad. If you use them for bad, you fry. Your karma is really bad. So you can't use them to hurt anybody. Because I could send an energy beam to you and heat up your right elbow or inside the right elbow or behind your left knee, and you'd feel it. You're not high or anything, but all of a sudden you feel this warm spot exactly where I'm directing it. So I did that with my son, Aubrey, and that helped, us get a little closer. But it just helped balance me out. If I wasn't doing yoga, I probably would have been doing a lot worse drugs than I was in terms of the Quaalude powder and a little bit of cocaine. But cocaine was so, spotty. You did it, like Craig said, he did it after a load came in. So what's that, every 2 months? All right. And I would do it, maybe twice a month. So it wasn't a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing with Coke is you just want to do more Coke, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You want to keep doing it and doing it and doing it.
Yeah.
And you better have the willpower to stop or you're going to really mess yourself up.
Big trouble. Yeah. Like Eddie Murphy said, right? Cocaine's a way of telling you you're making too much money. right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Or heroin,
all
God
right. So,
forbid.
yeah, right. So you got two young kids, you got a giant mansion, you're buying planes and doing yoga. What's happening, like, in your head? Have you arrived? Do you still have other goals that you want to go accomplish, or you're just sort of living in the "look at me, I've arrived"?
I've arrived, one, and two, my goal was I had 3 trips on the water when I was busted, and the goal was that would have made me literally $100 million because they were Thai loads, and you make a lot more money on Thai than you did on Colombian. And the goal was to literally retire, turn the organization over to my lieutenants. I found out actually that as in trying to do that, it took 3 people to replace me. You know, one person couldn't
Not
do what I was
surprising.
doing. Yes.
Right.
So I had the 3 picked out, and they were going to run the thing. And I was going to just stay home and raise a family, grow my own, fruits and vegetables, organically grown, work on my land. I had a wood shop there, a woodwork, a gymnasium there. I had a bookshelf that went up to the ceiling. So, and raised my kid. Natural, healthy lifestyle. But that was never to be because I got busted before that could happen.
Right. Right. All right. Anything else you want to add about, the lifestyle of living as the king of pot? In those, your friends, your family, and how you were treated.
Well, it's an interesting thing because when you decide that you want to retire, one of the things that happens to you, I had 200 employees. That's 200 salaries. That's 200, I usually,
200
all,
families, right? That's 200. Yeah, it's a whole thing.
yeah. And, so you had that responsibility. That's why I didn't want to shut it down. That's why I wanted to keep going. But also it was a lot of fun things. Like Becky and I, a couple Christmases, we made all these presents for all the workers. Remember, there was 40 to 50 full-time workers at the house up in Ukiah. And then we snuck around to all their houses when they weren't there. And we put the presents inside the kitchen cabinet, inside the refrigerator, underneath the bed. And it was always great, expensive, nice presents. And we had a ball doing that. You
I
could
bet.
not only just help families and help with their livelihood and their incomes, but you really supported a lot of people. The economic benefit to just the Mendocino County, just from us, just from me, was
Right.
huge. And it
Right.
impacted a lot of people. And that's a good feeling. That's a rewarding feeling to help others,
Yeah, I mean, and didn't you also just take these really basically out of work fishermen and turn them into smugglers,
Yeah.
also helping them and helping their careers?
We helped the entire West Coast fishing fleet because it wasn't, once you do a smuggle, and you show them how to do it, like in, we talked about St. Pete being the birth of smuggling in America for Colombian, large loads of Colombian. Once Tommy Powell out of St. Petersburg did his first big smuggle from Colombia, and then he followed that up with 3 or 4 more, all his captains and crews said, oh, we can do this. And they went down and started smuggling. So one guy turned into 10 overnight, separately and secretly. They didn't all work together. They were doing their own thing. The same thing out in California, except in California it was a bit tougher to pull that off because it was such a big voyage. It was a huge 8,000-mile round-trip journey. You had to get the pot to the west coast of Colombia, which is not normal. It doesn't grow there. There's no roads or rivers to take it there.
Right.
And so, but a lot of Thai weed started coming in towards the end. And tons of that started flooding in with trip after trip from Thailand because that's what was happening. So a lot of these guys didn't lose their boats. They got to keep their boats, whether it was they were working for me or some of the offshoots of me. And, you had offshore competition with the Japanese for the fish, and then you had rising oil prices. Those two things competed to literally put these guys out of business.
Right.
And I came along and saved quite a few of them.
Well, that's nice. I think that's a great note to end on, that the King of Pot came in and saved everybody.
And
well, Bruce,
and again afterwards, I then wrote letters to the judge so each of these guys would get light sentences. So this is King of kingpin of organizations sought leniency for Monterey fishermen. And
Nice.
I did.
Nice.
You know,
No,
I
that's
wrote
nice of you.
each
We're going
one
to
of them
talk about
letters.
prison coming up. Yeah, we're going to talk about your whole bust and arrest and trial and all that stuff. And I know you got one of your DEA agents that busted you. He's going to come on soon, and we're going to talk to some other law enforcement folks who were chasing you back in those days, which I'm excited to talk about. So, thanks a lot for yet another thrilling episode of Becoming the King of Pot. We'll see you next time, Bruce. Thanks for again the stories. And I'm Todd Dankin. He's Bruce Perlowin, and this is Becoming the King of Pot. We'll see you next time.